We are less than a week away from Christmas, and you don't know what kind of roast you're going to do for your dinner. Here are your two options. You can go buy an insanely expensive piece of prime beef or lamb or goose, figure out how to roast it evenly without drying the meat out, start thinking about how much money you spent in a vain attempt to impress your dinner guests, begin wondering how you're going to make your next rent payment, realize that grocery prices have gone up almost 45% in the last decade in the US. Go to the library and rent some books on wage inequality. Lay awake in bed at night as you begin to hear the voice of an Italian plumber. Or you can make this easy, delicious, cheap cranberry pot roast instead, with a special potato side yet to come. I have here about a 2 pound boneless chuck roast. Chuck is a great choice here because it's flavorful, cheap, and usually has a decent bit of marbling. That's the small white flecks of fat running throughout the muscle. Those will all melt out during the long braise and give incredible flavor to our roast, but any tough cut that stands up well to long braising will work here. If your roast has a large concentration of fat running through it, this is your chance to trim it out, but it looks like my butcher has trimmed enough off, so I'll just throw the whole thing into my oiled Dutch oven that's set over medium-high heat, then sear on all sides for about 3 to 5 minutes until it's developed some nice golden brown color. While our beef sears, we can slice up an onion. I'm using red, but whatever you have is fine. I'll slice the onion in half, cut each half down the middle, then slice into medium-sized strips that will help to give a little bit of structure to our sauce. I'll also grab a few garlic cloves. You can chop them up or throw them in whole. They'll just melt into the stew over the long cooking. After about 5 minutes of searing on both sides, our roast has been browned. Now we'll remove from the pan, add the onion and garlic, and let them saute for a few minutes until they've softened. Depending on how much oil you added and how much fat rendered out of your beef, you might need to add a little more oil here. After a few minutes, the veggies have softened, and it's time to add a few tablespoons of tomato paste and a roughly equal amount of flour. Give that a stir and allow everything to brown for a few minutes. Browning the tomato paste and flour will help to give some extra depth of flavor to our sauce, and the flour will also help to thicken it. Once the tomato paste has gone a dark rusty red, it's time to deglaze with the cheapest red wine you can find. I'm using this $7 bottle of drugstore Merlot. Fight me in the comments if you have a problem with that. Now it's time for the star of the show, cranberries. I have a 12-ounce bag of fresh cranberries here. I'll give them a quick rinse to wash off any dirt. Then I'll dump about 3/4 of the bag into the pot. The cranberries will bring a fresh, vibrant, tart punch to our roast. But don't worry, we'll be adding a little sugar later to balance out all that acidity. I'll add about 1.5 cups of water, give that a stir, then I'll return the beef to the pot. Our more perceptive viewers might notice something different here. I decided to cut the roast up into several smaller pieces just to make it easier to stir everything around in the pot. I'll also throw in a preliminary hefty pinch of kosher salt, then cover with a lid and roast in the oven at just 200 F 93°C for anywhere between 3 to 6 hours, depending on the size of your roast. Cooking at such a low temp will give all the fat time to fully render and will help keep the meat from drying out. But if you're pressed for time, you can instead roast at 400 F 200°C for about 2 to 4 hours. You'll just have to make sure you check the meat after a few hours to assess how tender it is. After almost 5 hours of low temp roasting, when I poke the beef with a fork, it slides through with almost no resistance, though the meat isn't falling apart yet. This is just about where I want it, so for the last round of roasting, I'll add some carrots that I've peeled and cut into these vaguely rhombus looking shapes. Now I'll slide this pot back into the oven, this time without the lid, and I'll also raise the temp to 350 F 175°C. This final blast of dry heat is going to help us get some dark caramelized flavors in our roast. Those carrots should take about 45 minutes to just start to get tender, though we still want them to have some texture to them. They'll be a great contrast to the Jello soft beef. While the roast finishes, we can start on our mildly fancy potato side dish. This is a riff on Duchess potatoes, and it starts with about 1.5 pounds of whatever potatoes you want to use. I have some Yukon Golds here. I'll peel them and chop into a rough dice. We're just looking for pieces that have roughly the same mass so that they cook evenly. I'll dump these into a pot filled with water, bring to a boil, and cook until you can easily pierce with a knife and the potato offers no resistance. You want to err on the side of overcooked here. Nobody wants to bite into a piece of undercooked potato. Once thoroughly tender, we'll drain the water, then add an entire stick of butter, or more if you're really feeling indulgent. At this point, we're just treating these like mashed potatoes. Add enough salt, pepper, and milk until they taste right to you. Then we'll add in 2 to 3 egg yolks. Be sure to wastefully throw the whites down the sink like I did. And finally, about 4 ounces of any semi-firm cheese you'd like. I'm using this white cheddar. I'll grate this up using my microplane, then add to the potatoes and stir to combine. I should mention here that this is enough potatoes for 3, maybe 4 people, but you can easily double or triple this recipe to suit your needs. Use whatever baking dish you have. I've got this little square ceramic guy here that I've liberally greased up with melted butter. I'll transfer in the potato mixture, then I'll slide it into my oven and raise the temp to 400 F 200 C. I'll also pull the roast out and check to make sure the carrots are cooked through, but still have some firmness to them. While the potatoes bake, we can add the finishing touches to our roast. I'll start by adding a splash of balsamic vinegar. A little acid here really helps to wake up the flavors of a long roasted dish. From here, I'll start pulling the beef apart and then I'll taste for seasoning. It needs a good bit of salt, as well as some sugar. I'm adding about a teaspoon of both white and brown sugar. Once the roast is seasoned, we'll cover with a lid and leave it on a low flame to keep warm while our potatoes cook. After about 30 minutes in the oven, our potatoes are nicely golden brown and have puffed up quite a bit. That's thanks to the extra protein from the egg yolks. Remove from the oven and be sure to sprinkle on some dried chives to get a better pick for your thumbnail. And that's it, we're ready to eat. That beef is just fall apart tender. The brightness you get from using fresh cranberries really balances well with all the dark roasted flavors from such a long, slow braise. But all that acidity is balanced out from the added sugar, so it has an almost sweet and sour quality to it. And the potatoes are incredibly rich from the egg yolks, yet also light and puffy, almost like a souffle. I hope you give this festive feast a try. As always, like and subscribe so we can continue to grow the channel, and let me know in the comments what my next recipe should be. Until next time.